This lesson is going to review scientific notation and how it is used on the ACT College Entrance Exam. I'm going to talk about what scientific notation looks like and what it is used for. I'm also going to discuss how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide scientific numbers. Now let's head over to the classroom to review scientific notation. Okay, let's talk about scientific notation. Let's first talk about what it looks like. It looks like a number times 10 to a power. I'm going to show it like this. And I'm going to write that a power of n. The number that goes in front of the times 10 has to be a number between 1 and 10. Example, 5.2, 1.5. You cannot put 0.5 because 0.5 is not between 1 and 10. So that's the kind of number that has to go here. Then you're going to have a power of n. If that power of n is positive, that's going to represent a big number because that's what scientific notation is used for. How to write really big numbers or really small numbers. So if this power is positive, that's going to represent a big number. Just the opposite if n is negative. That's going to represent a really small number. So if you had to take a scientific number like 1.23 times 10 to the fourth, and you want to, well, what does that number mean? And you want to take it out of scientific notation. Well, you know that 4 is a positive number, so you're going to have to make, that represents a big number. So which way would I have to move this decimal place on the 1.23? Well, to make it bigger, 1.23, you would have to move it to the right. So how many places, though? That's what the power of 10, the 4 in this case, means. You're going to move the decimal place 4 places to the right, which makes it bigger. So we're going to get 1, move the decimal place twice, and then you still got to move it 2 more times to the right, so you're going to add a couple zeros. So it looks like 1, 2, 3 with a couple zeros. So if you watch here where the decimal was between the 1 and the 2, and if I moved it 4 places to the right, that's what this scientific notation number means. So you got 12,300. Let's do one of a small number now. What if we had 1.23 times 10 to the negative 3? Small number. That's what negative exponent on the 10 means. So that means you would have to move the decimal place 3 places to the left to make it look smaller. So we would move it 1 place to the left, and we still got 2 more places to go. So you would have to put 2 zeros in front of it. So it looks like 0.00123. Just to check, make sure we did that right. The decimal place was between the 1 and the 2. Negative exponent of 10 means smaller, so we're going to move it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. That's how small that number actually is. So you need to know what scientific numbers mean before we can even do any kind of applications, operations like add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and that's what we're going to talk about now. When you add or subtract scientific numbers, the key thing is the exponent, the power of 10, has to be the same. Just like when I talked about in the rules of exponents. When you add terms, they have to have the same exponent. Same thing with scientific numbers. They're applications of exponents. An example, if I had 4.56 times 10 to the third, and I wanted to subtract 1.15 times 10 to the third. Notice the power of 10. Both of them have power of 3. That has to be true. You cannot add or subtract them in terms of scientific numbers unless they have the same power. If they're not the same power, what you would have to do first is change them back out of scientific into how we normally write numbers. Then you would add or subtract. But since they have the same, these two scientific numbers have the same power of 10, your answer is going to keep that power of 10, so times 10 to the third. And then all you got to do is subtract, take 4.56 and subtract 1.15 from it. When you do that, you get 3.41. And it is in scientific notation. So that's how you, and if that was a plus, you would add the 4.56 and the 1.15 and put that number in front of the times 10 to the third. That's how you would do add and subtracting of scientific numbers. More commonly used is when you have to multiply and divide them. And that's what we need to talk about. Things can get a little tricky. So let's talk about multiplying. When you're multiplying two scientific numbers, it's kind of like when you're multiplying exponents. You add the powers. So that's what we're going to do with the powers of 10. We're going to add those powers of 10. And we're going to multiply the numbers in front of the times 10 and put that in front of the times 10. I know it sounds confusing, so I think I'd better just show you an example and it would be easier to understand. Say I gave you 3 times 10 to the 6th. And I wanted to multiply that by 2 times 10 to the 2nd. What you're going to do is, if you notice 3 times 10, that's a multiplication. You have 2 times 10. That's a multiplication, believe it or not. And if you have parentheses here, that means multiply in between them also. One thing you've learned in mathematics is when you have all multiplication, order is really not important. Keeping that in mind, we can just multiply whatever order we want. We can multiply the 3 and 2 that are in front of the times 10. And now let's bring down the times 10s now. Times 10 to the 6th, times 10 to the 2nd. It's legal. You're allowed to do that. Now, 3 times 2, that's 6. Times 10. Now, if you remember, these guys are both times 10. When you multiply, you add the exponents. Add the 6 and the 2 now. So you're going to get a power of 8. That's how you handle multiplication of scientific numbers. Now let's do division. Keep in mind when you multiply, you added the powers of 10. Geez, I wonder what we're going to do when we divide scientific numbers. So that's going to be dividing powers of 10. When you divide, you subtract the powers of 10. Example, 9 times 10 to the 11. Divided by 3 times 10 to the 5th. In the same manner as we did multiplication, you can do it with division. You're going to look at the numbers in front of the times 10s. What's 9 divided by 3? 3. Now all you basically have is you have the 10 to the 11 and 10 to the 5th. What do you do with 11 and 5? You subtract them. 11 minus 5 is 6. So you're going to get times 10 to the 6th. 3 times 10 to the 6th. It's that easy. Making yourself familiar with scientific notation and reviewing how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide scientific numbers will help you score well on the math portion of the ACT College Entrance Exam.